Welcome to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and today I'm bringing you books that were worth the hype. And I'm here the next day to talk about books that were not worth the hype. Yes, I've decided to film this over 2 days because I didn't want to make a just negative video and I didn't want to make a just positive video. I wanted to do a bit of both. So you get both. The turquoise Judith, I'm going to bring you 10 books that I really think were worth the hype. Your definition of hype can be whatever you want. I chose to use both my own perception of was it everywhere on my feed and also a little bit of Goodreads witchery of how many ratings did all of these books have. So I have 10-ish books to talk about. These are in no particular order. I don't own all of them. Some of them have been sent to me for review. Some of them haven't. Some of them were sent to me for review and then I reviewed the second one. Also, if you think that some of these books were worth the hype, that's fine. You're allowed to have your own opinions. It's all a bit of a jumble, but you've been disclaimed in no particular order. I don't know if this one will come as a surprise. I have got a dedicated review to this on my channel. This is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, author of The Night Circus. I did a whole review of whether this book could live up to the hype of its predecessor, The Night Circus, not a sequel, but that was the book it was following on from quite a few years later. And my general conclusion was that yes, it does. It's a good book. I don't think it's as strong as The Night Circus, but if you were seeing this everywhere, in every bookshop, in every special edition you could humanly see it in, I think it was genuinely worth the hype. I've not seen what the paperback cover looks like, but if it's prettier than this, then maybe get it in paperback. It follows a main character called Zachary, who basically, to summarise a quite chunky book, he gets caught up in a kind of secret underground world with this magical library that's kind of going on. Things are happening, some people are doing bad things, some people are doing good things. I don't want to spoil it for you. I really think this is worth reading if you like imaginative fantasy worlds, if you like interesting takes on characters, and the main character is also gay, which is very nice and makes me like a book more. The next I do not actually own physical copies of, and I'm sorry Fairy Loot, but despite the hype, I'm not spending £75 getting 3 matching editions of them. This is of course the David Bad trilogy. I am very hyped up for this, not only because they are all over my feed all the time because they're amazing, but also I finished The Empire of Gold 2 days ago and I'm still not okay with it. I devoured it in a day. It was so good. This whole trilogy, if you are on book Twitter, if you are in a fantasy book realm, you will have heard of these books. They are amazing. They are gin, there's romance, there's politics, there's family squabbles, there's magic, fantasy. It's basically everything I've ever wanted, and I can now firmly say from beginning to end, this series is worth the hype. It's 3 books, 3 quite chunky books, all of them amazing and all for very different reasons, and it does my favourite thing of the ending makes complete sense, but it would not be the ending you anticipated after reading the first few chapters of The City of Brass. It's just amazing and wonderful, and if I could do a full 20-minute video on it, I would, and I might. I say this every time I mention them, but I really rate the audiobooks. I think they're really, really good. The third one's coming out in June, I believe. I don't think that pub date's been moved. I could be wrong. Absorb them. Have a great time. This next book surprised me. I didn't think it was worth the hype, and then when I finally got around to reading it, I convinced myself. This is Gideon the Ninth, another book that has a dedicated video here on this channel. You can go and watch the reading vlog for this and hear my opinions real time. Basically, Gideon the Ninth got a lot of hype and I couldn't work out why. I'd read the first 100 pages and I was kind of like, this is doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, the main character's alright, but not great. And then I sat down and I finally actually sat down and read the whole thing, as one should probably do with books. And after about 250 pages, this book just picks up and everything makes sense and the beats of the story just fall in like that. And it's really, really good. And we meet the character that I like a lot more than Gideon and really get to know them a little bit better. Don't want to spoil things for you. And yeah, basically I'm super excited for the sequel. And if you've heard about this book, if everyone you know is talking about it, and maybe you've picked it up and thought, I don't know what everyone's talking about, persevere. Some books are worth the hype because other people have already finished them and they know better than you. And I'm sorry, it just happens sometimes. Another book that I don't own but that you've probably seen everywhere, this is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. It's so good, and so is the sequel, and much like the David Bad trilogy, it will destroy your heart, just stamped into the dust. No more heart for you. It is profoundly good. I have the sequel, The Dragon Republic, which holds up as well, but I really think The Poppy War is one to go for. One of the things that was kind of caught up in the hype about this book was the somewhat triggering, very disturbing portions of the book, so if that's something that bothers you, don't feel like you have to read this just because everyone's talking about it. But if you are interested, then I'm certain there are people out there who will tell you what happens in those chapters and which bits to avoid. I think there are guides out there. I think this is one of those books where I'm like, oh, you like fantasy? Have you read this? And if not, then What have you been doing? Where are you? Why aren't you listening to me? Why are you running away? The next book is another book I don't own, but I have digital review copies of. This is Ascension by Victor Dixon, and I don't know if you all think this was hyped or not. I personally do, because it was all over my Twitter, and that could be who I was following, but I think there was just a lot of marketing energy put behind this book because it was at the same time as Love Island was kind of in its peak. It was marketed as Love Island in space, which was everything I wanted. I'm not a fan of Love Island, but put that in space and I'm available. I will read your silly book. For what this book is, I think it really holds up, and the places it goes later in the series, I think this is well worth reading. These are translated from French, but the translation is really good. It's really interesting where this ends up, to go from silly space dating, absolutely no reason that this would work, to where it ends up. I think it's very, very clever, and I would actually recommend them. They're not so much hyped anymore now that all of them are out, but at the time I was hearing about them every single day, and I cannot recommend them highly enough. Next I have The Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. I've actually included these as kind of one because I think that Six of Crows alone is not worth the hype that it gets, but the two of them together as a set work really well. I think Crooked Kingdom is the stronger of the two, but I think you would miss out not reading them together. I couldn't separate them, so I'm going to talk about them together. I'm only going to hold one because I have bird arms. This is a heisty book. It's heist YA. It's some of the strongest heist YA. There are better heist books, but in terms of the young adult part of it, I think this is really strong. There's a reason these books are so beloved. Good fun, it's quippy. I think it's some of Leigh Bardugo's strongest work. I have yet to read another book that gets me like these two books get me by her, as you might see when we get to the books I liked less section, but I haven't filmed that yet. I think these are worth the hype. I don't think everyone would agree with me. I think some people, they aren't for them. But I would say if you're new to YA especially, pick them up, it would be a good time for you. Next I have an adult fantasy. This is one of the few fairy tale-y books on this list actually, which given that it's one of the things I read most of is quite surprising. This is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. Naomi Novik has written everything, and I could have talked about every single book that she's written probably to talk about how hyped it was, but this is the book that I see the most in bookshops, in displays, in that kind of thing. This book features a girl called Agnieszka who basically ends up being sent off taken to the dragon, who is actually a man, he's a magician, his tower, to serve him for a certain amount of time from her village, and then stuff happens, and there's an enchanted wood that's very malicious. There's a malicious enchanted wood. The magic system in this is I think what sets it apart, and the difference in the way that people do magic I really loved. This was kind of everything I wanted when I read it, and it was my first, I don't think it was my first foray into adult fantasy, but it was one of the strongest books that I read when I was starting off blogging, and yeah, I think this is 100% worth the hype. If you haven't read it yet, what are you doing? Again, no, do come back, let me talk to you more about books. The other somewhat fairy tale-esque book I've got is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. Another one where I'd probably say read the whole series if you want it to live up to the hype. This I picked up because it was one of the big books that was being talked about when I first started blogging, and I desperately wanted some books, and I wanted to own more books, and I had a disposable income for the first time ever because I was in my first paying job, and I saw this online and I was like, that cover looks interesting, and then I got completely sucked in. I loved this. The second one is even better. The third one broke my heart into several pieces. I'm still not okay about it. I think what I love about this is that it holds its own. It's a slow burn at the start. This one is profoundly slow, and I think if you gave it to me now, I'd be saying like, what is this? Why are you wasting my time? But knowing how it ends and rereading this is just a beautiful journey. The characters grow so much, every single one. Heroes, villains, side characters, horses, they all grow so much, and I just adore it. I think this is now up for a Hugo this year, so hyped. Definitely worth reading, most assuredly, but the second and third one are faster, so if you get bogged down in this one, don't worry, the other two are much faster. Another series that I've decided to cram into one, actually I think just the first one is worth the hype. You've already seen a sneak peek. This is Jade City and Jade War by Fonda Lee. These were everywhere, and every single person I knew who was talking about fantasy was talking about these, and I was dubious. I didn't know what to expect. This first one looked too much like The Wizard of Oz for me, or Wicked, one of the covers of Wicked, and I was like, I don't know, and then I read them, and then, well, I read Jade City, and then I immediately needed Jade War straight away, and basically pestered Orbit until it was possible to receive a copy, and thankfully did. Read it, adored it, love every single character. This is like a fantasy novel crossed with an old school kung fu movie. There's a lot of family ties, there's politics, really interesting magic. I think Justine said this, but the city is another character, and the second one completely holds up. I need the third one immediately. These are so worth every moment of hype that they get. And last on my list of books that are worth the hype, this is another book that kind of kicked me into my blogging journey. This is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Now, I had loved the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series when I was probably about 16, 17, and I was just going through a breakup, and I think that's an important thing to note. It was part of why I loved it so much. I know they're not for everyone, but I was so excited to see that Laini Taylor was bringing something else out, and this came out, yeah, just as I started blogging. I pre-ordered it. I think I nagged my housemates to be home because I got it delivered to home instead of work. I have recollections of being so excited to get this, and it 100% lives up to my expectations. I cried so much when I read this. I cried so much when I read it a second time in preparation for the sequel. It's a duology and it looks really big, but it whizzes by. We have Laszlo, who works in a library and is just the sweetest, but then has amazing character development throughout the books. He's not just this kind of like, I'm just a simple boy with no backstory. It's so good. The second one is heart-wrenching, profoundly beautiful. If you don't love Laini Taylor's writing, you probably won't love these. That's all I'll say. If you were hyped up for the other books, then you won't love this. Or similarly, if you love this and you're thinking about getting Daughter of Smoke and Bone in the very ugly, in my opinion, new covers, then maybe don't. If you didn't like, they're very similar. Her writing is not for everyone. But if you like lyrical writing, if you like descriptive writing, then I think do yourself a favour, read this. It's so good. So I also have 10 books that weren't worth the hype. I have no idea how I'm going to put this video together yet, so enjoy that weird transition. Obviously, I haven't hung on to most of the books that I did not enjoy. I have 2 here, so editing me is going to have to do a fair amount of work here. So really, it's like there's 3 of me. I mean, that's a nightmarish situation. First on my list, I have Once and Future by Amy Rose Capetta and Corey McCarthy. This was everywhere on my Twitter, and I wanted to love this, and part of the reason this is on this list is because it disappointed me. I talked about this in a recent blog, I've talked about it in wrap-ups, I've talked about the sequel also. This is a great idea. It's an amazing idea to try and do Space King Arthur, and to do it with pretty much every queer identity you can possibly have. But when the writing is not good, and the plot is not good, you just have a book that is kind of and this is probably the better of the 2. The second book goes into time travel. This book I just did not enjoy. I didn't enjoy it at all, and I talk a bit in the vlog where I talk about this, about the difference between representation and education, and I think that it tries to do both, and I don't think it succeeds. This is an unfortunate one to have to include on this list. I have hung on to it because I just so desperately want to love it. I'm so frustrated that I can't. Next, I have Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Now, I wasn't around on the bookish internet when these started coming out, but I was around when, I think the 5th one, whichever one is gold, came out, and I saw it everywhere. There were special editions up the wazoo. It was hyped. It was a series that people were reading. So when I had the chance to read the audiobook for, I think it was a buy one get one free or something similar, I thought, hey, let's see what the hype is about. And I hated this. I've talked about this before, but what a stupid book. It is not a spoiler to say that a female character, one of very few, is fridged right at the start of this series. We meet this really cool female character, and then her entire purpose is to serve as emotional fodder for this young boy who annoys me. And the rest of the book is just like, I'm gonna punch everyone, I'm angsty, but I'm more powerful than they know, It's just everything I hate about a male young adult protagonist rolled into one, and it's possible that the books get better and that they are worth the hype, but I don't think so, purely based on how they start. The next book on this list is Ninth House, and I feel okay putting this in there. The Leigh Bardugo fanatics are not going to come at me because I put Six of Crows in the other list, but Ninth House was hyped up. And I don't want to get into the whole, should there have been content warnings, because the answer is yes, there should have been content warnings, and then the publisher said there would be and there were not. Draw a line under that, that's not what I'm talking about. I just don't think this book was very good. Thought it was perfectly adequate. It was fine as a adult mystery, fantasy, spooky book. It felt like the moment where a Disney Channel star tries to break into a different industry and you're just there like, oh, no, oh honey, no, this is too far. Pull it back, rein it in. That was my general opinion of Ninth House, was that it was perfectly adequate, but the amount of people buying it and the amount of people talking about it needed it to calm down. I don't think it was worth the hype. Next up was a book that came out around the same time. This was The Beautiful by Renée Ahdieh, and I actually really like Renée Ahdieh's books. I have The Wrath and the Dawn on my shelf. I love it. It's a really good sort of semi-fantasy, really low fantasy romance, and I think that's what Renée Ahdieh writes well, and I was kind of excited about the idea of vampires. I'm not gonna lie, I was intrigued. I thought, well, somebody's got to do it. Let's see what it's like. Again, it just didn't work. I have very little recollection of the book. It did not stick with me, which is really unfortunate. But all I remember is that the vampires are never said to be vampires. And I think you could entirely eliminate that fact from their being, and the book would be pretty much the same. It's just bad posh people. And I know the sequel's coming out soon, and I've seen much less hype for it, and I'm wondering if maybe everyone else has also felt similarly. The next book on my list is Ready Player One. I have talked at length about Ready Player One on my blog. I will link that below if I remember. It is a long rant post about why I really dislike Ready Player One. I just think Ready Player One is another terrible male protagonist, and in this case, the male protagonist's terribleness manifests in gatekeeping. There's a whole plot point in Ready Player One where they're solving clues to do with the 80s, and the main character and his pals are like, we're going to solve these clues and give none of our information to anyone else. The book as a whole seems to treat this as, it's fine to have really cool information, but you have to keep it for yourself. You don't share knowledge, and in the context of the book, it's a competition, so I kind of get it, but the book also feels like it's making you as a reader feel stupid for not knowing these things. I just thought it was disappointing, hugely disappointing. The next book on my list is Infinity Sun by Adam Silvera. This was Adam Silvera's first fantasy book. It's a superhero book, for a start. I think anyone who's read it would agree with me. I don't think it's a fantasy book, but it was marketed as such, so there we go. I haven't read any of Adam Silvera's contemporary, so I can't speak to whether I enjoy his writing in that. Infinity Sun just felt like a waste of time to me. I didn't like how the magic works, but partly because it was never really explained. I didn't really like any of the characters. They all grew on me a little and then completely tanked again. There was nobody I was rooting for. I loved that he had a main character who was a young gay man, and that wasn't his entire personality. I thought that was done really well, and you could see that was kind of what the book wanted to be, but then all of the rest of the shaping of it that makes YA fantasy was just not there. Next I have Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the first book in this series. I am reading the second one this month, so I may have more to add to this, who knows. I have hung on to this in the hope that the second book is better than this one. This book got so much hype because it's the same authors as Illumini. It's them going back to sci-fi. There was a hot space elf. It was all there. But it just isn't. This book is so lackluster. It frustrates me so much. I don't like any of the characters, and it feels like the book thinks you should. My overall impression of this book is that they think the book is much better than it is, and I don't know why that comes across that way, but that was the 100% the feeling I had. I'm frustrated, and I'm hoping that the second book is better. The next book on my list is Vox, and it's kind of here to stand in for every single one of those Handmaid's Tale wannabes that came out last year and the year before, if I'm remembering correctly, because they all jumbled together. Vox is the one where women can only speak up to 100 words a day, and it investigates this world, and it was disappointing. It was everywhere in every bookshop display of, so you've read The Handmaid's Tale, what now? It just is one of these books where it starts off with a really cool concept and ends with a woman having an affair, and that's the plot. And you think, gosh, wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't have a man in this? That would have been fun. That was pretty much how I felt about all of those similar books. I think The Power was another one. I didn't really care. And I think that dystopian fiction that explores these kind of things is really important, but I don't want it to just be being published because The Handmaid's Tale was doing well at that time. Do you know what I mean? The next book on this list is Wicked Saints. I don't want to go too much into this because I think everyone has pretty much already ripped this book to shreds. This is not a good book. It got a lot of hype. It was talked about a lot. It had a very lovely cover. It had a very lovely concept. But the writing is not very good, and the characters are not very good, and the plot is not very good. Maybe I'm a mean person for thinking it, but I think that this was one of those books where it needed a bit more time in the oven. Just search Wicked Saints reviews. I think Amber has one that will entertain you. Last on my list is Everything Under. This was a Man Booker Prize nominee, and I could probably put almost every Man Booker Prize nominee on the list of books that I don't think were worth the hype, because I'm not a huge fan of that style of writing, but Everything Under caught my eye because it was also a retelling. It was everywhere in Oxford because the author used to work at Blackwell's, the bookshop, and they were very, very excited about this fact, and it did make me laugh every time it won Book of the Year because it felt like the most nepotistic nonsense. Anyway, I read everything under. It is an Oedipus retelling. I don't know the story of Oedipus too well, but I know the main beats of the story, so I knew what to expect going in. And this book does things with gender that are non-traditional in the original story. There's a lot about homelessness. It has the ingredients of a book that could be very good, but for me, I think that the gender representation was bad, and I think that using gender representation as your plot device is not necessarily the best thing. It does a lot of that whole like, aha, a reveal, and it's just uncomfortable, and I didn't enjoy it at all, and that's why it's on this list. This was surprisingly hard to film, this half of the video, I'll be honest. I don't like being horrible about books. None of these books are horrendous, never read them, they should never have been published. They just, for me, didn't quite live up to my expectation of them from how people were talking about them. So bear that in mind. I'm gonna let yesterday me sign off. I think I'm gonna end the video because I'm nice and friendly, and also the sun is shining and I don't know what the weather will be like tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed this. Do comment below if you have any books that you would add to either of these lists, or if you disagree with me. I'd love to hear why. Maybe I've completely missed something. Maybe something went whoosh over my head. Let me know your thoughts. You can also give this a thumbs up. You can subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated, and I will see you in the next one.